Well, hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Angela Dingle. I am the CEO of XMe Hello Management. We are a management and technology consultancy based in Washington, D.C. I am the host of the Cyber Savvy CEO. It's a monthly webinar series for C-suite executives where we discuss cybersecurity from a business standpoint. So not a whole lot of technical speak, more about business risk. So each month, we share real world scenarios to help you to understand what you need to do to protect, detect, respond to, and recover from cyber attacks. It's not a matter in this day and age of if you will become a victim of a cyber attack, it's just a matter of when. And we know from experience and from research that leadership is key when it comes to protecting your business against cyber threats. So I am joined today by Ms. Carla Dickens. She is the managing director of the Mouton Insurance Brokerage. Carla has a wide range of knowledge and expertise in developing appropriate commercial insurance products for both domestic and international clients. Carla is life licensed and is able to recommend life insurance products for both the businesses and for individuals. Her goal is to provide the type of service and knowledge that is rarely experienced in the industry today. And that's one of the main reasons that she's with us on today's session. She is currently a member and past board of director for the Metropolitan Association of Independent Insurance Agents. Carla is currently a member of the DC Chamber of Commerce, as am I, and a Women in Business Committee member. Carla, it is so good to be here with you. Welcome to the Cyber Savvy CEO.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you for having me. This is a great discussion. I'm really looking forward to passing on some good information to our small and medium-sized businesses. So thanks for having me.
Good. So before we begin our discussion, I'd like to review just a couple of housekeeping items. So your cameras and microphones have been disabled to ensure the quality of our recording. We'll be answering questions. So we've got some Q&A time at the conclusion of the presentation. However, feel free to use the chat button to type your questions during the presentation. And as we see those come up, we'll do our best to try to answer them. Also, you have access to the reactions where you can raise your hand or show your support for some of the things that we're talking about during today's session. Today's meeting is being recorded. The recording will be distributed to everyone who registered to attend within the next 24 hours. So if you have registered to attend, you will be able to see that recording. All right, so why don't we get started here? I am happy to start today's discussion about the 5 things that you need to know about cybersecurity. And to set the stage for our discussion, I'm just going to borrow a synopsis from a PR Newswire release that I saw. So, quote unquote, the global pandemic has seen a huge rise in people working from home, shopping online, and generally being more digitally connected than ever. There are plenty of good things that come from this, but as we're all aware, there is a lot of bad that has come along with it as a result of it. And one of the biggest issues, according to this Newswire report, is that cyber attacks have skyrocketed during this period. Cyber criminals have taken this opportunity to up their attacks, both in frequency and in scope. And so for us, you know, COVID is this new normal, and it's really forced us to quickly adapt the way that we conduct business. I mean, as a business owner, I've had to make some adjustments as the country was shutting down. Individual cities had restrictions on what you were and were not permitted to do. And so for some companies, it was cash flow disruptions that caused them to have to pivot and offer new products and services. I belong to a number of women's business networks, and that was the discussion in those networks about whether we were pivoting or swiveling, whatever we were doing to be able to respond to the changes that were happening as a result of COVID. And this whole move from the workplace to working from home, it didn't come with an instruction manual. You know, we're in technology, and even for us, we had to make some adjustments as we were dealing with the fact that people would permanently or for an extended period of time be working from home. So for a lot of companies, you know, this was just new behavior and they didn't know what to do about it. So prior to COVID, cyber criminals were already launching attacks. and stealthily, observing behaviors and figuring out ways to launch additional attacks. And that really hasn't changed. And so the FBI had been monitoring and watching all of this happening. And last year, they reported that the number of complaints about cyber attacks to their cyber division was up by as many as 4,000 a day. 4,000, that's a lot. And so that represents about a 400% increase from what they were seeing pre-COVID. And Interpol is also seeing an alarming rate of cyber attacks that are aimed at major corporations, at governments. There are a number of state and local governments that have been attacked, as well as critical infrastructure. And these attacks, while they're targeting all types of businesses, large corporations and governments and critical medical organizations have been targets as well. But for today, I'm certain our listeners have heard about all of those big ones, just like they've probably heard about SolarWinds and about the Colonial Pipeline and the JBS cyber attacks. So today, I want us to talk about what this looks like for the small to medium-sized business market, because these businesses are under attack as well. So Carla, from a technology standpoint, we're seeing some really sophisticated tactics across a variety of industries like manufacturing, professional services. We've seen cyber attacks in food distribution and obviously in technology. So what are you seeing from an insurance perspective? Like, what are the top cyber-related insurance claims that you're seeing?
So it's really interesting. That's a good question. It's kind of vacillating from year to year, but from 2017, 18, and starting in the 19, healthcare was number one. And that includes, doctors' offices, medical billing, any type of medical profession, small to medium. Healthcare, 38% across the board for insurance claims. The next category was professional services at 16%. And then I've seen some data as soon as yesterday, actually. Technology, education, and retail are actually climbing. And professional services is also doing the same. But for now, we'll focus on healthcare, professional services, and I'd like to talk a little bit about education as well, because that's on the rise. A lot of claim scenarios to look at.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the same thing as well. One thing that came out in the healthcare industry from a cyber attack standpoint, they've had cyber attacks that have occurred, and they've been pretty high in that industry before. But one of the things that happened during COVID was just the exhaustion that the workers are seeing is causing them to make additional mistakes. And so we see some of the numbers increasing there as well. So anything else you wanted to share about those industries?
Well, it's so true. I mean, not only did 38% of the healthcare providers were affected just in terms of claims, by far they're the most vulnerable. But I think in recent years, especially since 2020, they've become a little bit more proactive as opposed to reactive. And so the numbers are showing that the claim statistics are going down for the healthcare industry now, finally. But it's increasing in professional services. And that would be your CPAs, your law firms, your consultants, which is, primarily a small to medium-sized entity. So this is really important for people in that industry to pay attention to, because one huge claim could really, affect the operation of your business and at worst scenario, take you out altogether.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, we're seeing more in professional services as well, especially because of COVID, because now so many people are working from home. So service providers that may have had, a little bit more structure in the workplace once their employees went home, some of them really didn't even know what to do. People were using their personal computers initially when they first started working from home. So that was an issue that we experienced as well in looking at professional services.
No, it's true. I think a lot of it has to do with people working from home. There's been a huge increase in cyber security issues based on everyone having to work from home. You don't really have the same type of setup that you do at home that you do in your workplace, just in terms of cybersecurity. And so I've always said that it's really important for people to have two things in place. One, you really need to have a good cybersecurity expert, a specialist, and you need to have a great cyber policy to cover you in the event that those things do happen. So hopefully we'll get into that. But that would be you and I for the most part. Yeah, of course, you don't have to come through us, but make sure that you have it if it's not with us, with someone else to prevent, a total loss.
Definitely, thank you. So if you are taking notes, this information that we've just shared is really important, and it gets to our first point. The bad guys are targeting the companies that are unprepared, right? The small and the medium-sized companies that don't have a plan and don't have a partner or an internal cybersecurity team that is protecting their systems. Based on the research that we see, and so in the line of work that we do, we're always looking at the trends to help people to understand what types of threats are out there. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But research has indicated year over year that 7 out of 10 small businesses are just unprepared. They're not prepared to deal with the cyber attack. And so, if it's ransomware, they don't know how to respond to ransomware. They may not have the appropriate protections in place. CEO fraud is a fairly common one that happens with small to medium-sized businesses, and they're effective because they're targeting the low-level employees who simply want to do what it is that their boss is asking them to do. And then we're also seeing CEO fraud attacks even on really popular people, like Barbara Corcoran from the Shark Tank was the victim of a CEO fraud attack last year. They got away with $400,000 before her team was able to figure it out. So for any of our listeners that are startups or solo practitioners or micro businesses, don't make the mistake of thinking that you're too small or too important just because you're a one-person company to be the victim of a cyber attack. So I'm going to check the chat. It looks like there might be a question there. All right, I do see one question. As a professional services firm, should I be concerned as a micro business? Is there a such thing as being too small to be a target? I think I may have just answered that question for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you definitely need to protect yourself, even if you're a one-person firm, because we'll talk about the cost of cyber attacks here shortly, and we'll talk about some of the tactics that they're using. And you'll find that it doesn't matter whether you're a one-person company or not. There's still ways for cyber criminals to do the work that they do, regardless of the size of your company.
I was going to say that there used to be a notion. I'm sorry, Angela. I was just going to mention this one thing, that there used to really be a notion that cyber insurance was for companies who has housed a lot of data information. That's not really the case anymore. It's for everyone, all businesses, everyone in all industries they actually have cyber exposures. They just need to be aware of it. So I'm really glad that we're doing this today.
Thank you. So we talked a little bit about the industries, and I talked about some of the tactics. What tactics are you seeing? Are cyber criminals using the same tactics for each type of company that they encounter, or are you seeing something different there?
It's interesting. I'm seeing a couple of different things. This is a good slide because it really outlines the type of cyber attacks and where they're coming from. If they're from human error, which is a significant amount, depending on the industry, of cyber exposure comes from human error. But let's just focus on the industries that we've talked about before. Healthcare. Healthcare was actually 38% of the insurance claims in the industry from 2018, 2019. They were just not ready. They were unprepared and they were reactive as opposed to proactive. I think over the last year or so, they've become a little bit more proactive, but there's still some concern. The healthcare industry, for sure. Let me take a look. We looked at the human error. Rogue employees is another issue. I think that people don't think about if they have an unhappy or a disgruntled employee, working for them, the kind of damage they can actually do if they're inside of the business. It's more of an internal threat as opposed to external. So that's something that you really need to be aware of. Lost and stolen devices is another one. But I'm saying that when you have protection, for software error and privacy issues, the cases of claims is significantly lower if you already have something in place. So what does that say to us? It says that, you want to definitely have something in place. You want to have a privacy policy. You want to pay attention to human error, have some cyber practices in place to prevent that from happening. Of course, consult with your cyber expert, and also be aware of hacking, because that's always going to be number one. I think most hackers or most claims come from hacking, which is about 28% of the industry right now.
So Carla, your correlation of this data to industry, to healthcare, for instance, is something that we see pretty commonly. For example, the human error number that you see, and so we'll talk healthcare first, and then I'll talk other industries. One of the things that happens in healthcare is just human nature, right? So if we remove COVID from the discussion and we think about what happens when people go to the hospital, some of what we're seeing is a show that I love, like Grey's Anatomy, right? People are working really, really long hours. They simply get exhausted. I remember when I was pursuing my master's degree, the nurses who were also pursuing their master's degrees were sitting in classes with me talking about technology. So you have people that are supposed to be providing care that also have to use this technology and remember how to use the technology efficiently when they've not necessarily had enough sleep. That's one of the reasons that their human error numbers are up.
Yeah.
Another thing that you'll find in particular in healthcare is that if you move to different parts of the country and you're looking at hospitals that have celebrities that come in, who doesn't want to take a picture of Brad Pitt while he's in the hospital, and then they're releasing that information because they had access to it, sharing it with some friends. But then when you look at some of these other areas, like hacking is pretty common in the small to medium sized industry because of what I said before. 7 out of 10 of the companies just don't have the appropriate protections in place. And when you think about these rogue employees, right, this 13% within, so if anyone is doing business with the federal government, with state and local governments, we were talking about DC government this week, as well as with the Department of Defense, that's a huge issue for them. These rogue employees, they're called insider threats, right? Because something has caused them to decide that they're not playing nice in the sandbox anymore, and they can cause a significant amount of damage as well. Whether they are rogue intentionally or they're rogue because they made the mistake. So if we talk about other types of errors, the target breach was one that was caused by an error. We have a client that we were having conversations with that ended up having to pay $1 million in Bitcoin because one of their employees, just clicked on something he or she wasn't supposed to click on. So these types of incidents and the combination of the industries that they occur in are really important to business owners as you look to ways to make sure that you're protecting your organization. And so then that leads me to our next point. So if you're taking notes, you need to know what it is that you're up against, right? So first of all, you need to understand that if you're unprepared, you are the perfect target for the bad guys. And number two, now that you understand that, you need to know what it is that you're up against. I think that what we see more often, especially with really small companies, is they go, well, I don't have anything that a hacker would want. Well, the bad guys want your data because they make money from your data, right? And so as a service provider, we look at this kind of data on an annual basis. And each of these industries kind of tends to trend up and down. And so some years the small businesses get a little bit smarter. and other years they end up at the bottom of the rung. And when it's all said and done, you just need to know what's going on at any given time. So as a business owner, you need to understand what it is that you're up against on any given day so that you can respond and adjust appropriately. So,
or at least have the right things in place, like, have your expert, your cyber expert, so that they can take care of knowing what you're up against. Have the right kind of policy in place, so in the event that it does happen, you don't have to worry about coming out of pocket for, forensics or, or just PR, making sure that everybody knows that there's an attack, but we're taking care of it. So at least have those two things in place. That's my recommendation.
Yeah, so we talked about what business owners are facing in terms of the threat, but then let's talk about just what you brought up just now. What's the cost of responding to a cyber incident, right? So I know from experience that one of the things that has not changed because of COVID, it's only gotten bigger, is the motivation behind these attacks. Year over year, it's been a financial motivation. The cyber criminals are making upwards of about $14 million a day by launching cyber attacks. Listen, I mean, I watch it all the time. If you think about it, so I mentioned that one firm who paid, $1 million in Bitcoin. And although they paid the $1 million in Bitcoin, they did not have the things to back it up. They didn't have an incident plan. They didn't have the appropriate security in place. So then they got hit again. And if I can hit 14 companies in a day and get $1 million, then I'm sitting pretty. And that's what's happening with these cyber attacks. So I know that there are about 4 or 5 different costs that are associated with a cyber incident, like detection of the incident. You might have to buy software technology, notification, post-breach data, data response, restoring your capabilities in a kind of lost business. What can you tell us about the cost of a cyber attack?
So it's really interesting because from an insurance standpoint, what carriers are most concerned with when they come into a cyber claim is containing it and then remediating it. So they want to make sure that they can stop it from happening and then figure out how it came in, what happened. And so in order for them to do this, they have to hire a forensics firm, which, it's costly, but it has to be done. You can spend, depending on the industry, and it really does depend on the industry, because in healthcare, you're thinking about a lot of different issues. You have the HIPAA laws, so they're going to have a lot of, fines and penalties. So containment is really the most important thing that they can do first and foremost in the healthcare industry. But just to hire a forensics firm can cost you, up to $200,000. If you have a good cyber policy, it'll take care of that. And that's just to hire a forensics firm to contain it and remediate it. We're not even talking about, the legal costs that you have to go through, or if there's some kind of ransomware involved where they're holding your information hostage and you have to make a payment like your client did. And, they did it in Bitcoin, but just think, some of these hackers, they don't want Bitcoin, they want actual cash. So there's another piece of monetary money that you have to kind of come out of pocket with if you don't have a cyber policy in place. Credit monitoring, you want to offer that to all of the people who were affected. There was a claim scenario that I looked at where 46 hospitals were hacked. Hospitals, doctors' offices, medical billing companies, 46. From all of these databases, 400 hospitals were affected. And this information was circulated to Russian hackers. Okay, that's one scenario. Another scenario involved some Inova in Virginia. 1 million people were affected by that. So the reason I mention that is because 1 million people needed to have their credit monitored to see if they were affected by this hack. Cyber policy is something that covers that, but it's a cost. For this particular instance, and healthcare professionals, it looks like it's almost $50,000 just to monitor people's credit who was affected by your hack. And we'll get into the coverages, but it's what we call a third party expense. It's not directly related to the hack that that happened to your network. It's affecting someone that's in your network, which is considered the third party. So these are all some really crucial expenses that have to be paid, and they come in play when you're trying to, remediate and contain a situation. And this is just the basics. We're not talking about fines and penalties, ransomware. I mean, for healthcare industry, fines and penalties because of HIPAA can run you, and this is a scenario based on 1,500 records. So for 1,500 records, you're going to have to pay over $400,000 for fines and penalties for 1,500 records. It's crazy, but this is what has to happen in order to make right from a cyber attack.
Well, those numbers are pretty daunting. And so for our listeners, what you need to take away from this is that cyber incidents can cost you. I have had the pleasure of and the honor of testifying in front of Congress on more than one occasion about the costs associated with cyber incidents and what it looks like for small businesses. Most time you hear about the cost of a breach, and for small businesses, that's $30,000, $40,000, and that may be that initial number that we saw there on your slide. But there are all these additional costs that come about as a result of it, and then depending on what industry you're in, what city and state you live in, who your customers are, there may be additional requirements. So Carla, you mentioned them needing to provide credit counseling for them. Depending on what industry it is, it's not optional. You have to do it. And for anyone that's doing business, again, with any state or local or federal agencies, you may be required to report it to specific agencies, and you may be required to pay some of those things. So, I'm sure people are thinking, won't cyber insurance cover this? And if so, won't it just give me the money? The Bitcoins are hard for the banks to trace.
Mm-hmm. That's why they wanted to get paid that way. Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
What we saw happen with Colonial and with JSB, those are rare. You typically don't get the money back, and so the government figured out a way to go get that money back. But so if a business's data is damaged or destroyed, I know a standard policy doesn't cover that data restoration and rectification. So what can you tell us about the types of cyber insurance we should consider, and what do business owners need to do in order to qualify for that?
Well, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked me that, because not everyone will qualify for cyber coverage. Standard carriers do not want to provide coverage for businesses that don't have security in place. They want to make sure that you understand that this is an issue and that you're doing whatever you can to prevent it from happening. Case in point, there was a client that needed an increase. They already had cyber coverage with us, but they needed an increase based on a contract that they were getting with the government that they were working with. I think it was a DC government contract. The carrier would not provide them coverage because they did not have, and you can probably speak a little bit more on this, MFA, which is multi-functional authentication. Yes, yeah. Multi-factional authentication. So it's a process, a 2 or 3 step process. I know you know a lot more about it than I do, but having that is pretty basic. And for a lot of times people have it they have the potential to have it, but they don't have it turned on. And so, this particular client didn't have it turned on, but when I mentioned it to them, they, went to their IT person, had it turned on the very same day, and was able to get the increase in premium. So, the message here is for small businesses, you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to prevent a cyber attack from happening, so that you can get the type of coverage that you need to secure you, so that you won't have to pay out-of-pocket expenses.
Yeah, we're seeing something
I'm sorry,
similar
go ahead.
with two of our customers. We have a customer whose policy came up for renewal, and they wanted us to work through to see which cyber provisions should be put in place. And in the end, the fact that we had helped them to develop their cybersecurity program allowed them to get their renewal. So their renewal just had a conversation with them yesterday. But we have another client who we just started working with, and their plans aren't developed, and they can't. There's a questionnaire from the insurance company that has all of these cyber related questions, and we've just started working with them, so they're just not ready yet, so they are not able to get that cyber insurance. So are you seeing anything in terms of limits, like the amount of money that companies have to cover through contracts or anything like that?
Yeah, for the most part, 1 million in cyber security limit is pretty good.
Okay.
But you do have some contracts that require more.
Okay.
And they're looking at 2 million, and that's when that's when the carriers become a little hesitant about, and not just hesitant, but they just want to make sure that you have everything in place before they cover this expense, because as you can see, it can be, in the millions. So, making sure that you have the MFA, the authentication, making sure that you have employees that are trained on, what to click on and what not to click on, making sure that, everything is in place to try and prevent this from happening as best as possible.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much what's going on in terms of the higher limits. Now, with there was one thing that I
While
wanted.
you're checking your notes, I'll ask you a question from one of our
Okay.
participants. And I'm not sure if you have this information readily available, but what would be an average annual premium for a smaller or medium-sized business client that has, if they have their cybersecurity practices in place and they're able to provide that information to the insurance company on their application? What is the range of annual premiums? Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, so I hate to kind of shoot from the hip when it comes to premium, because it's based on so many different things. It's industry related, it's sales revenue related, it's employee, how many employees do you have?
Okay. So those are factors
those
that
are all
people need to take into
factors. Yeah,
consideration.
but I can tell you that I've seen a range from, and it's really not that expensive. I mean, I know that's, expenses, that
Relative.
right, exactly. It depends on who you're talking to, and right. So, but I've seen it as low as, maybe 1,100, 1,200 for the year.
Yeah, that's not too bad.
It really isn't, considering, and I mean, even if, for a small business, you still might have to break that down into a monthly kind of a cost. But it's, if you're looking at $1,200, and that's definitely on the low end, you're looking at an investment of about $100 a month, which is well worth it when we talk about these figures. Just in terms of containment, remediation, PR work, $100 a month is well worth it.
Yeah, this whole conversation leads me to the fourth thing that we think people need to know, right? And that's, you need to get some cyber insurance.
Yes.
Because I know we've worked with firms, some as small as a 2-person firm, who have been the victim of a cyber attack. And I mean, even if it's not $1 million that they're asking for, even if it's only $40,000 or $50,000, it's $40,000 or $50,000 that's lost, because I haven't seen anything less than about $36,000. So even if it's only that initial $36,000 that's lost, there are still other costs associated with that. And typically you somehow have to make up that $30,000 that is gone, because not all of it is ransomware. Some of it is they simply take the money right out of the bank, right?
Yeah.
And so that's some of what we've seen. So, for the folks that are joining us today, just keep in mind that although you need some cyber insurance, it might take some work for you to position your firm so that you can qualify for it. So, if you haven't started looking at those things, like one basic thing that any person can do with with the configuration of either your laptop or your email, is to add multi-factor authentication. So that's our 4th thing that you need to make sure that you do, that you need to know about cybersecurity. So finally,
and that's pretty basic, right, Angela? Just from
yeah, it is pretty basic. If you think about it, it's already happening. If you have a bank account, the fact that you have a bank card and a PIN, that is technically multi-factor authentication, because it's something that you have and something that you know. When it comes to computers, that has become a lot more advanced because the cyber criminals are a lot more advanced. The cyber criminals are watching everything you do, right? They're in your bank accounts, they're listening on your phones. They've gotten so creative. They call you on the phone now, they send you text messages. They leave, they're just doing really, really creative things to be able to get.
I mean, I've even gotten IRS. I'm like, the IRS. They don't call you, do they?
Yeah, but the average person doesn't know that the IRS doesn't call you, right? So the IRS will not call you and say, hey, you owe us some money, give me the money. IRS communicates in writing all the time because they want some proof that you owe them money, right?
Right.
But a lot of people don't know them, so they don't know how to respond. So let's talk about this concept of cyber savvy CEO. So one thing that I found is that large companies and small companies, they tend to make the mistake of believing that they're safe from cyber crimes because they have some technology in place. Oh, I'm running Norton antivirus, or I ran some malware protection, or I've got a firewall, or I did a backup, and my backup's going to be ready and available for me if a cyber crime occurs. The reality, though, is that most of the backups are not current, and they're not readily accessible in a way that will allow business owners to recover in the event of a cyber crime. So I mentioned the one food distribution company that paid the $1 million in Bitcoin. So the hackers had been in their system. So it was a phishing. It was a result of phishing. The employee clicked on a link. They launched a phishing attack. They were able to get into the systems. Once they figured out the pattern of the way the company worked, then they launched the ransomware attack. The owner called the insurance company. They paid the claim, so paid the $1 million in Bitcoins, and the hackers gave them back the keys to unlock all of their systems. When they went to get their backups and run their backups, none of the backups were good. 3-4 weeks, they were out of commission. And so when we talk about cyber savvy CEOs, technology in and of itself doesn't solve a problem. You need more than just a technology solution. So what happened was the hackers waited 2 or 3 more weeks, and then they did it again. So they got hit twice in about a 6-month period in a 6-week period of time. And during that 6-week period of time, she was unable to operate, all systems down. So no money, you can make no money for 6 weeks.
Wow.
So an over-reliance on technology, and in some instances, an over-reliance or overconfidence in technology solutions, can ruin your reputation, and it can cost you a lot of money, which leads to our 5th and final thing that you need to know about cybersecurity, and that's that cybersecurity is really a people problem. What do I mean by that? 80% of all security breaches are as a result of either an internal error as opposed to an external hacker, or a technical configuration problem as opposed to an external hacker, right? If I don't have my systems configured properly, I don't have multi-factor authentication in place, that's the real thing that caused it, as opposed to what the hacker did because they figured it out. It's a person that writes their passwords down on a piece of paper and leaves the paper somewhere. It's a person that writes the code that's going to hack into your computer. It's a person that decides to steal your identity and take money from your bank account. Cybersecurity is a people problem. And cyber savvy CEOs know and understand this. So 86% of them have a clearly defined cyber strategy in place. They incorporate cybersecurity training and awareness throughout the workplace, right? What I said to the woman who paid the Bitcoin was, I said, you have to tell the rest of your employees what happened. And she said, I don't want to hurt his feelings. I said, you have to tell everyone else so they don't do the same thing. Because if they don't know they aren't supposed to click on the link, guess what? Somebody else will click on the link. And so for cyber savvy CEOs, security awareness and training is really important. You set the tone at the top of your organization. People are going to mimic what they see. If you're the person who says, I don't want to follow the password rules, I don't want to have my laptop scanned, I don't want to have to, log in through the VPN, guess what? You're setting the tone and other people are going to do the same thing. So if it's not important to you, why is it going to be important to them, right? So if you don't take anything else from today's session, I want you to remember that the bad guys, they are out to get your data. I can't make my screen go here. They are relentless. Every single day, there are cyber criminals that are trying to get to your data and trying to make money from you. They are relentless. They are innovative. The tactics that they were using have become so creative that I actually have to watch. I mean, I have to watch and I have to watch constantly. No more can I scroll through something on my phone and make a decision. I've really got to pay attention because they make the websites and they make the phishing claims look just like what it is that we would expect if it were a legitimate email. So Carla, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us and sharing these valuable insights. Do you have any final points that you want to share with our listeners? And then I'll open it up for questions for our last couple minutes here.
Yeah, well, no, really, thank you for having me. I enjoyed talking about this. I think it's something that all small, medium, and large businesses need to be aware of because it's on the rise. It really is. And so we need to be prepared and arm ourselves so that, businesses don't go under based solely on a cyber attack. Unfortunately, in the insurance industry, we've seen it happen too many times. So I'm glad that we're talking to our business community and letting them know that that you have tactics that you can arm yourself with, and we're here, right here.
Thank you. All right, so if you have any questions, you can type it into the chat and we'll do our best to answer it for you during our remaining time together. We've got a couple of minutes. I'll kind of keep my eye on the chat while I am closing us out. And I just want to thank you in advance for joining today's Cyber Savvy CEO, where we discuss the business side of cybersecurity from the C-suite perspective. Thank you again, Carla, for spending some time with me. It's so good to have this conversation with you. I know we've talked about insurance and cyber and all these things, and it was great to get your insights and that research. Yes. All right, so we've got a couple minutes here. Yeah, we'll give folks a minute to check on those.